Let's go back in time now to the 9th century Adade. Vikings were mighty warriors who sailed out from Scandinavia to pillage and plunder across Europe, perhaps even discovering North America a full 500 years before Christopher Columbus. This is part 2 in our series about what it might have been like to live as a Viking. In part 1, which you can watch here, we discuss life as a Viking warrior. Life as a Viking farmer was a hard and lonely existence. And to understand what it was really like to live as a Viking, it's essential to explore all facets of their society, including their beliefs, values, and traditions. Doing this gives us a richer and more nuanced understanding of the Viking world and challenges us to reconsider some of the stereotypes and misconceptions that have become so deeply ingrained in popular culture. Remember, history doesn't just belong in books or museums. It's a living, breathing thing that shapes our world every day. So keep learning, keep exploring, and keep asking questions. You never know what you might discover. Until next time, thanks for watching. Ultimately, by taking the time to learn about the complexity and richness of Viking culture, we can all gain a greater appreciation for the contributions of these fascinating people to history. They lived in harsh environments, often isolated from other human settlements, and they had to contend with the constant threat of famine, disease, and of course, the occasional Viking raid. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. The Vikings were known for their love of storytelling, and the long, dark winters provided ample opportunity for sharing tales with friends and family. The Vikings also had a rich culture and valued things like craftsmanship, exploration, and independence, and these values were reflected in many aspects of their daily lives. From the construction of their boats to the design of their homes, the Vikings took pride in their ability to create beautiful and functional objects. In addition, the Vikings were skilled traders and merchants, and many of them traveled to distant lands in search of exotic goods and new experiences. This adventurous spirit was also evident in their mythology and folklore, which was filled with stories of brave heroes and mythical creatures. Overall, life as a Viking farmer may not have been easy, but it was certainly never boring. Now we're going to discuss life as a Viking farmer. Don't forget to give this episode a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss any of our videos. We are a history channel and we bring you new videos every week. That's a lot of history. And to make all this possible, we have to rely on support from our viewers. So if you appreciate the work that we do and want to help us continue making great videos, please consider joining our Patreon. For as little as $1 per month, you can help us out tremendously. And in return, we've got all sorts of goodies to say thank you. These include behind-the-scenes videos, blooper reels, early access to new episodes, a patron-exclusive podcast, and much, much more. Plus, every patron, regardless of donation amount, gets a digital copy of our book Vikings, a visual compendium. It's our best work yet, and we think you'll love it. Our last episode was about living as a Viking warrior, and we talked about how most Vikings were actually farmers. But since that's the case, what exactly did it look like to live as a Viking farmer? What kind of challenges would they face? What kinds of activities would they engage in? Well, the answer to that question takes us right back to the farmstead where we left off last time. But this was only one facet of the Viking worldview, and not necessarily the most important one either. Not the quiet dark of a modern room, but oppressing. Total dark, the kind that hangs heavy with wood smoke and the breath of sleeping animals. The thatched roof is dripping from yesterday's melt. The smell of damp wool and sheep manure is thick in the air. Your bed is straw, uneven and already flattened. It's late winter, or maybe early spring, though the seasons blur together here. You can't read a calendar, you read the roof beams. You read the sheep, you swing your feet over the side. The floor is stone, and the stone is cold. Your toes are already numb by the time you reach for your thick, grease-darkened tunic. No buttons. Just a rough pull over your head and a stiff belt that never quite stays in place. Outside, the wind hisses between the turf walls. You hear it before you feel it, a low, rolling moan that wraps around the farmstead like a wet cloak. Your boots are stiff, your fingers already ache. Your first task? Hay that's half frozen and must be forked from a sodden pile and carried, armful by armful, into the animal pens. The sheep crowd near the entrance. Some are ill-tempered, one limps. You've named it, but you'll have to butcher it soon. There's no barn, not in the modern sense. Just one long hall, part house, part stable. You share warmth with your livestock. Their smell clings to everything. Next, water. You trek to the stream, breaking ice along the way. The bucket cracks against the surface. You hope it doesn't split. If it does, you'll have to carve a new one. The fields outside are still too wet to plow, but you pace them anyway, boots sinking into the mossy earth. You're watching for rocks, for drift, for the signs of molehills or root spread that could spoil the first furrow. You check the fences. You find one post leaning. Fixing it means finding a rock, pounding it with your axe hammer, lashing it with rope made of old seal sinew. You keep the axe close. Wolves sometimes watch the sheep from the ridge. The sun finally rises, but it brings no warmth. Just more wind and a flatter kind of gray. Smoke drifts from nearby longhouses. You see it and wonder what kind of stew they're boiling. By midday, your stomach aches with hunger. There's dried fish. And maybe a chunk of sour rye bread soaked in goat's milk. It's enough to keep working. You mend harnesses. You haul peat. You milk the sheep, slowly, carefully, while swatting at gnats and minding the churn. Evening brings more of the same. Repair, feed, watch, wait. You gather in the longhouse, your hands red and raw, your feet wet again. A single oil lamp flickers on the table. It smells of rancid fat, but it casts light. You fall asleep beside your brother, your uncle, or a cousin. Maybe someone snores. Maybe someone turns in their sleep and elbows your ribs. There's no privacy, no comfort, no certainty the sheep will survive the night. But you sleep because tomorrow you'll do it all again. In fact, for every hour spent pillaging, Vikings probably spent a day farming, repairing boats, trading, or just trying to stay alive in the unforgiving north. So let's slow down the Viking history lesson for a moment and imagine what it was really like to live as a Viking. This is a reenactment of a Viking longhouse interior from Norway. Welcome to my channel. I am your host. You wake in the dark? If this sounds like a pretty bleak existence, well, then you're really not that far off. Now, this is only one small part of the bigger picture, of course. And speaking of gaining an appreciation for the contributions of fascinating people to history, you can do exactly that by supporting our channel. So that's it for this episode. Thank you all so much for watching, and a huge thank you to our supporters for helping us make this happen. In the shadow of Europe's highest peak, at the top of a glacier where sun and ice collide, there's a story written in stone. To see it, you need to go back 5,000 years. Back to when giants roamed the earth, so the legends say. Back to the Bronze Age. Back to the people who lived between reindeer and ice. They left their mark in unusual places, across the ridges of the mountains, on the frozen edge of the world. Above the snow line, high up on the flanks of Monte Rosa, there's an ancient wall. 5,000 years ago, this might have been the edge of the world. Beyond lay only cold, dark ice. Today, scientists believe it was probably a boundary, a line drawn across the landscape to separate the known from the unknown, the familiar from the dangerous. Either way, it's clear the people who built it were willing to push right to the edge. And just beyond, somewhere within the zone of ice and rock, there's another story. A little girl has died. Her name was Lisa, or maybe she had no name. She was born sometime before 3200 BC, and when she died, her people gathered in the ice. They built an igloo out of rocks and placed her inside. Then they carried on. Maybe they celebrated her next of kin, continued the tribe. They spread to new hunting grounds. They followed the herds. They learned new skills. They survived, but every so often someone would turn back. They would make the long trek up the mountain. They would crawl into the igloo of ice and stand in silence with the ghost of a child. In the deepest days of winter, 5,000 years later, someone would chisel into the glacier. They would create a face looking out over the void of ice, a frozen sentinel watching the relentless advance of snouts of snow. For millennia, the glacier would preserve everything, the tools and treasures buried beneath, the marks of visitors, and the traces of those who came back again and again to the igloo. Thousands of years later, modern archaeologists would find a cup. Its shape is called a pedestal beaker. It dates to about 2700 BC. The rim is decorated with geometric lines. That's all we know. The beaker was left beside the girl, maybe as an offering, maybe just as a cup. The rest of the grave is simple. Flint tools, a harpoon point, a knife, pieces of charcoal and burned bone. In time, all of this would be lost to the creeping ice until modern explorers arrived in the early 19th century. They found the girl in the ice. They photographed the cup and the wall and the sentinels. They watched the glaciers move and advanced higher into the mountains. Over the next few decades, scientists would learn more about the ice, more about the girl. In 2016, we found out her name, Lisa. And what we think happened to her, she wasn't alone. She had a brother. He died young too. Lisa was 12, her brother 8. They both died during a harsh winter, a brutal test of survival. This wasn't a sacrifice, it was desperation. Faced with famine, the tribe chose to protect the strong. So the weak froze. Here at the top of the world, they were casualties of a harsh natural order, but their story isn't sad. It's remarkable. In the last ice age, Europeans hunted reindeer and made tools from flint. They kept warm in caves or huddled around fires. They traced patterns into cave walls. They endured. After the ice came, they endured some more. 12,000 years ago, when the world warmed, the glaciers receded. The tribes who lived near them followed, but in the mountains life went on. Lisa and her brother remained in their eternal winter, while the rest of Europe moved on. As the centuries passed, the tribes below grew bolder. They climbed higher and higher to trade with distant people, to hunt new animals, and eventually to leave their own monuments of stone. But the glaciers didn't care. They crept forward. They erased whole valleys. They turned mountains into piles of dust. They swallowed Lisa and her brother in a blanket of ice. And for thousands of years, they preserved the secrets of the ice. It took another 7,000 years for scientists to discover them. At the edge of the world, you could always find something new. 1,000 miles away, closer to civilization, another discovery was being made. 11,000 years ago, during the Mesolithic period, coastal people learned how to navigate the fjords of northern Europe. They hunted seals, fished for herring and salmon, and constructed boats from wood and animal skins. By 8,000 BC, they were traveling 500 miles along the coast of Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. By 6,000 BC, they were moving twice as far. By 5,000 BC, they were sailing south. They explored lands without snow. They saw trees that didn't shiver in the cold. They encountered people who had never seen a glacier. In the warmth, they began to forget their heritage. But sometimes that forgetfulness lasted only a moment. Along a stretch of coast southeast of Oslo, you can find the graves of a family who hesitated. They traveled south, but then they came back. They brought artifacts from afar, but ultimately chose to return home. It's an epic journey, but in reality, it's a very short trip. Their bones tell us they walked 12 miles along the ice shelf. Then they paused. They spent a whole summer there. Then they walked another 6 miles to the tip of the peninsula. crossed the narrow inlet, and set foot on land for the first time. Their bones tell us they lived there for almost a year. Then they headed back, walking another 20 miles to their permanent home. Even in a slow boat, it would have taken 2 weeks to travel that far. On foot, it was a 2-day walk. The entire journey would have taken less than a month. Yet these travelers hesitated again and again. Why? Did they grow homesick? Did they argue? Did they run out of food? We don't know. All we have are their bones and their things. But as long as they stayed on the mainland, they were safe. Once they reached dry land, they built a house and a hearth and planted crops. They became farmers. Within a few generations, they forgot how to hunt or fish. They traded their boats for plows, their spears for sickles. But when they moved back to the ice, they couldn't forget. They brought their farming tools, but they never used them. They didn't plant a single crop. Instead, they lived off the land, hunting deer and reindeer, fishing, gathering berries. It was a struggle, but they adapted. The hunters of the North were patient. They understood the rhythms of nature. They knew how to track animals. They knew how to survive. Eventually, they integrated into local society. They made friends and raised families. They married into old bloodlines. They spoke a new language and adopted new customs. Within a few generations, they too became hunters of the North. Eventually, they forgot they were explorers. They forgot that they'd ever planted a seed or tended a flame. They became part of the glaciers. For 10,000 years, the glaciers held their story. It took another 2,000 years for scientists to find them. And when they finally did, all they found was this: a village, 4 skeletons, and a scattering of artifacts. On the shore, Vikings liked to brag about their adventures. They spoke of Vinland and Greenland and the Isle of the Blessed. These were faraway places, rich with wildlife and ripe for plunder. But the Vikings also kept secrets. Not every voyage was broadcast across the North Sea. Not every tale was meant to inspire awe or fear. Sometimes there was no victory to boast of, no battle to celebrate, no giant to slay. Sometimes there was only exploration. But the quietest journeys were the longest ones. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, the team spent almost a decade painting these, so there must be 3,650 of them, and I couldn't agree more. It's the same for our calendars. The yew tree is sacred to the Druids. It's the keeper of wisdom. February is Rowan, with the tree representing courage, protection. Sure, each month has a full moon, but also a waning and a new moon. Like when I googled lunar calendar, I got directed to Islamic websites. I'm going to track the phases of the moon, the cycles of the earth, and the signs of the zodiac. And since I care about the environment, I think that's a really good message. It's about recognizing the natural world, appreciating the trees, and understanding our dependence on them. I have a writer, an editor, a graphic designer, and we're looking for artists. So if you're talented and interested, please apply through the link below. Together, we can make something incredible. And trust me, this project is going to be big. It's the biggest thing I've ever taken on. It's incredibly ambitious. But it's necessary. I know that sounds like a weird thing to say. Why does measuring time have to be complicated? Can't we just stick with one system? Well, the thing is, we can't. Calendars aren't neutral. They reflect our biases and our priorities. They shape how we perceive the world. And it's important that we have multiple perspectives. So I might plant a tree. I might visit a forest. I might buy some local honey. The same could be said for calendars. We have to learn to use them together, respect each other's traditions, and appreciate the beauty of diversity. And maybe that's the real lesson. We're all trying to navigate this world in our own unique ways. We have different experiences, different values, and different goals. But we all want to understand the world around us. We all want to find meaning in the chaos and we all want to find our place in the universe. We need calendars, we need systems to organize our thoughts, and we need to remember that these are just human constructs. They're not absolute truths. They're not perfect representations of reality, and we shouldn't treat them that way. We should use them as tools, guides to help us understand the world around us. And as we go through life, we should be willing to adjust them, adapt them, and improve them. Just like the Norse, we should learn from our mistakes and our successes. And we should keep moving forward together. But other holidays won't resonate with me as much, like Passover or Ramadan. Thank you for listening, watching, and learning, and I'll see you in the next video. So I might fast for a day, read the Torah, or attend some religious services. It's about being respectful, learning from other cultures, and honoring their traditions. I'm not saying this is easy. It's very challenging. I'm gonna need a lot of focus and discipline, but I want to try it, so please join me. I'm going to mark the solstices and equinoxes, the festivals and holidays, and anything else that catches my attention. I'll post monthly updates telling you what I learned, what worked, and what didn't. And if you're not interested, that's fine too. Please don't judge me. I know I'm privileged to be able to experiment like this. For most people, calendars are a necessity, not a choice. And that's why I'm committed to making this series accessible to everyone. It's one of the reasons I moved to a sponsor. I wanted to build something sustainable without relying on a single platform, but I also want to incorporate feedback. Let me know what you think. I'm excited, but also terrified. How am I going to balance both calendars? How will I manage 2 different weeks, 2 different months, 2 different years? Here's the thing, you don't have to pick just one. You can use both. You can choose what feels best for you, whether that's the Gregorian calendar or the lunar one, or a combination of both. It's like a buffet, just take what you want and leave the rest. And honestly, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to take bits and pieces from both calendars, from both ways of measuring time. I'm going to track the moon phases and the zodiac signs. I'm going to celebrate the seasonal festivals and the agricultural rhythms. And I'm going to acknowledge the major holidays like Christmas or Easter or Ramadan. I'm going to research each one and decide which aspects resonate with me. When I Googled sidereal calendar, I landed on Hindu ones. And when I Googled tropical calendar, I mostly found Christian ones. So how do we get out of this mess? Maybe by realizing that different calendars aren't mutually exclusive. Maybe it's okay to pick and choose, to blend systems, to honor multiple traditions. And maybe it's okay if nothing lines up perfectly. When I look back on my own history, I can see so many different influences: Catholic school, Buddhist meditation, pagan festivals, and the Chinese New Year. I don't consider any of these calendars superior. I just recognize that each one offers a different perspective, and together they help me make sense of the world. It's actually based on the signs of the zodiac. And if you're like me, that probably sounds confusing. Like, wait, the moon and the stars, they don't line up anymore. Well, you'd be right. The truth is, the moon rotates the Earth roughly every 27 days, but the Earth's orbit around the sun takes 365 days. So there's a mismatch from the start. That's why our standard calendar divides the year into 4 seasons, but the zodiac calendar into 12 signs. Either way, the result is us trying to squeeze the natural world into human categories. And we've come up with some creative solutions, like the tropical year, which fixes the first day of the year to the winter solstice. Then there's the sidereal year, which aligns with the constellations, and the intercalation year, which actually adds an extra month to keep things aligned. Each of these calendars has its own logic, which makes sense, right? Because time is everywhere. It's in the clouds, in the trees, in the soil, and in us. We're all connected. The trees need the sun to photosynthesize. The birds need the seasons to migrate. And we need calendars to organize our societies. March is ash, a symbol of strength, power, healing. April is willow, creativity, intuition, dreams. May is hawthorn, love, beauty, magic. June is oak, endurance, longevity, strength. July is holly, balance, protection, peace. August is cedar, wisdom, enlightenment, connection to the divine. September is ash again, but this time associated with balance, intuition. October is alder, transformation, rebirth, the underworld. November is birch, new beginnings, purification, growth. And December is ivy, friendship, loyalty, community. When I saw this old lunar one, I immediately thought of those paintings, of a whole year worth of stories. This isn't just a date, it's an entire system. So when I don't just want to know what day it is, I want to know what this day means. What happened here? What can I learn? Well, if you look closely, each box has a symbol, a plant, a creature, maybe an event. All together, they tell the story of an entire year. Now, these are inspired by the Celtic tree calendar, which goes back about 2,000 years. And it's been popular recently because it blends two systems, the solar year and the lunar cycles. And today we're going to try it on for ourselves. January is you, and this image reminds me of the cover art for the first Witcher book, Blood of Elves. The benefit of this calendar is that it's more natural. Instead of having arbitrary months with random numbers of days, we have 13 moons that track the cycles of the earth. And I think that's important because we are a part of nature. We should use it to our advantage. We don't have to force ourselves to fit into boxes. We can flow. The problem is I'm a slave to the modern calendar. I have deadlines, bills, appointments. It's incredibly difficult to move away from that. But I really like this system, so here's my plan. I'm going to study both calendars, compare them, find correspondences, see what's missing. And then I'll spend a whole year documenting the differences, the pros and cons, the challenges, the surprises, and the lessons. Now, I've already learned something just from researching this video. This lunar calendar is not entirely based on the moon. It's interesting that even though these are such basic functions, we fight over them. So for this next year, I'm going to document this process. For example, the Jewish holiday Tu B'Shvat is coming up in about a month. It's known as the New Year for trees. If you're interested, follow along and let me know what you think. Ask questions, share resources, and send me messages. And here's my proposal. My favorite quote comes from Martin Luther King Jr. He said, "We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools." And that's where I'm going to begin, not with the calendar, but with myself. So thank you for joining me on this journey. We often think of Vikings as hard men, men of action, men of war, and yes, they were that. But remember, they were also builders, traders, farmers, storytellers. And behind all that, weaving it all together, was the role of host. The Norse farmed the sea, coaxing herring, salmon, and whitefish from its depths. We're also going to continue exploring Norse culture and history in future videos. So if there's something you'd like us to cover, let us know. We'll find a way to spin it into a yarn worthy of the Eddas. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay curious, stay creative, and above all, stay kind. Remember, behind every story, there's a whole web of influences, inspirations, and creative choices. We'd love for you to be part of ours. They chased seals and porpoises, but also wrestled with storms and shipworms. They honored the gods of wind and waves, but also faced their dangers head-on. Vikings built their boats from sturdy oak, ash, and pine, and equipped them with sails of linen and wool. They charted courses by the stars, but also followed seasoned instincts. They navigated fjords and straits, but also braved the open sea. To sail was both a craft and a gamble, a skill and a prayer. If we picture Vikings as fearless warriors, we forget that fear lurked everywhere on the sea. Storms could swallow a ship whole. Cold could freeze a sailor's fingers. Sharks circled below. Legend spoke of sea monsters and whirlpools. But the Vikings pushed on. They sought new fishing grounds, trading posts, and plunder. They craved the wealth of the Mediterranean, the riches of the Byzantine Empire, the silver of England, the furs of the north. The sea beckoned with untold riches and perilous beauty. The Vikings adopted by crafting some of the most sophisticated vessels ever seen. Their longships were swift and shallow, perfect for navigating rivers and coastlines. They hauled their prizes overland and dropped them back into the sea, bringing them home. Their victories fueled sagas of daring exploits and cunning tactics. The Vikings became renowned for their seamanship and strategic brilliance, but the sea kept claiming victims. Voyages turned into tragedies, expeditions ended in defeat. The Vikings learned to respect the unpredictability of the waters, the fickle moods of the winds, the relentless grip of ice. Their ballads grew somber, their prayers more fervent. Yet the lure of the sea remained. It called to adventurers, traders, and warriors, promising fame and fortune or oblivion. To be a Viking was to live on the edge, embracing the triumphs and tragedies of the boundless deep. In Norse tales, the sea is a character itself. It shapes the lives of mortals, influencing their fortunes, testing their mettle, and swallowing their dreams. The Vikings, bound to the sea, lived with its rhythms, revered its mysteries, and ultimately submitted to its embrace. The ability to welcome people into your hall, share food and drink, then send them away again with full stomachs and new stories to tell. Being a good host was more than manners. It was an obligation, a way of life. It was security. It was peace. The Norse were bound to each other by a web of hospitality. We've all seen those sitcom dads trying to make the nicest grilled cheese ever for their kid as one friend. That awkward fear of messing up the guest experience. Well, imagine that times infinity. Your entire livelihood depended on welcoming people into your home. Your reputation, your relationships, your very survival often relied on being a good host. When a traveler arrived at a farm, he was immediately offered food and drink, not as a courtesy, but as a right. If he refused, his reason for doing so might be questioned. Was he drunk? Insane? Had he insulted the host? Or maybe he was carrying a curse. All kinds of misfortune could follow a refusal, illness, violence, or the wrath of the gods themselves. So guests accepted whatever was offered and ate in silence until the host broke the quiet. If he wanted to speak, that was fine, but if he chose to remain silent, so be it. He was welcome to sit and absorb the atmosphere, watch the others, think his own thoughts. Sometimes a guest would stay for days. He might help with chores, spinning flax, or mending nets, or hauling in the harvest. He might teach the young ones a skill or tell stories from faraway lands. He might also bring news, local and distant, about markets, raids, marriages, births, deaths, anything that mattered to the community. If a warrior arrived, his weapons were taken from him at the door, not because the host feared him, but because a house with weapons inside was a dangerous place. Men could argue and lose control. Women and children could wander near and get hurt. Weapons were put in a special place, and care was taken not to disturb them. When the time came for the guest to leave, the whole household saw him off. Everyone gathered outside, women, children, the elderly, all wishing the person safe travels. It was an essential part of Norse culture. It wasn't polite, it was vital. No one traveled alone. No one stayed truly alone. The concept of alone is hard to translate into Norse terms. Sure, you can say that the word existed, that people understood the idea of being by oneself, of being an individual. But in practice, the Norse worldview didn't really allow for it. Alone implied self-sufficiency, the ability to take care of oneself without help, and that wasn't how things worked. In Norse society, everyone depended on everyone else, neighbors, kin, friends, even rivals. There was no such thing as privacy, not in the modern sense. Sharing a house, sharing a farm, sharing a meat hall, these were the norms. Privacy, in fact, was impossible. Your bedroom wall was paper thin, your bed partner snored, your neighbors gossiped and eavesdropped, your kids screamed and spilled stuff. And that was just life. Now, we might see this as an inconvenience, an intrusion, but consider the opposite. What if you never had to worry about what to say or how to act? Because wherever you went, whoever you met, you were instantly part of a community. That's what it meant to be a host, to be a guest. It wasn't just about food and drink. It was about belonging. The Norsemen believed their world was created by a series of bargains. The dwarves carved the first ships for the gods in exchange for the Brisingamen necklace. The first mead was brewed by a giant, but only after he tricked the god Loki into getting his goat. And the greatest stories were passed from mouth to mouth, each telling adding a verse, each listener hanging on every word. Bargaining was in their blood. It was how they built their ships, their homes, their lives. And nowhere was bargaining more important than in the mead hall. There, beneath the great roof, surrounded by the faces of friends and family, men bargained for their reputations, their honor, their standing in the community. In the Norse world, respect was a currency in itself, earned with deeds, maintained with pride, and spent on oaths. Every poem recited, every tankard raised, every boast traded, everything a man said and did within the hall was a transaction. And just like any other business, it had to be conducted properly. Consider the famous story of Ragnar Lothbrok, legendary Viking hero. Remember that scene where he walks into King Elach's hall and demands to be given 60 feet of gold or to have his blood spilled upon the floor? Well, it's not quite as simple as that. In the original Old Norse account, Ragnar isn't demanding anything. He's making a statement, an extravagant one, and he's challenging the king to uphold his end of the bargain, to give him what he asks for. He isn't threatening war, although that might happen. He's reminding the king of his responsibilities. As a host, Ella has 3 options. He can give Ragnar what he asks for. He can refuse, in which case he starts a diplomatic incident that could lead to war. Or he can use the opportunity to save face and offer something in return. Let's go with option 2. Say no, but don't just say no. Make it poetic. Make it memorable. Give the hero a reason to remember you and recount your encounter to bards and skalds. In our modern world, we might see this as just boasting, flexing, posturing. But for the Norse, it was serious business. You had to know how to spend your respect wisely, and you had to know how to earn it back. The great halls of Norse legend weren't just places of feasting and fighting, though we certainly had plenty of both. They were also universities, training grounds for the skills of speech and repartee. The best hosts knew exactly what to say, when to say it, and how to deliver it. With the right words, you could gain a friend, forge an alliance, secure a marriage, even save your life. And if you were a good bargainer, well, you got to live and tell the tale. The sea is both a gift and a demand. It provides sustenance and bounty, but also chaos and wrath. Now it's time to ask you something. What is the biggest misconception you've seen about Vikings or Norse culture? Share it in the comments below. The ocean breeze carries a chill that bites even through the thickest wool, driving you to seek shelter within the sturdy walls of a longhouse. Rain lashes against the roof, mimicking the clamor of voices raised in song and mirth only hours ago. Then you hear a word that makes your heart skip a beat, the C word, death. The healer is tending to someone suffering from what we would call tuberculosis, a disease caused by bacteria that most commonly affects the lungs. It can spread through coughing or sneezing, or by coming into contact with infected bodily fluids. The process involved cleansing the deceased with cold water while reciting incantations to aid their soul's journey. You know that in other communities, the corpse is left unwashed until the last moment. In extreme cases, the body might even be flung out to sea. Workers are summoned to assist with digging, hauling, and construction. As a member of the village, you help move the excavated soil and line the pit with flat stones. The men clear larger stones from the surrounding area to form a circle around the burial site. The chieftain and his wife visit the grave regularly, bringing fresh flowers or simply sitting in companionable silence. They tell you about their daughter, the joy she brought to their lives, and the void left by her absence. The saga of the young queen may have ended, but her memory lives on in the hearts of her people and in the grand cairn that marks her final resting place. You return to your daily life, carrying with you the lessons learned and the strength you discovered within yourself. One afternoon, the chieftain's son approaches you. His eyes are downcast, but he manages a weak smile when he meets your gaze. He asks you to accompany him to the riverbank, where you spend the day fishing in silence. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across the water, he speaks. He tells you of his dreams for the future, dreams his father shared, dreams that now feel impossible without his sister. Meanwhile, others begin constructing the ship, either by hauling a pre-built vessel to the pit or assembling one on site. The winter's snow has melted, replaced by vibrant green shoots and the promise of new life. They thank you again for your role in building the cairn and ask you to stand with them as they unveil the centerpiece of the memorial, an intricately carved runestone. From the icy peaks of the mountains to the bustling halls of the longhouse, you've witnessed their traditions firsthand, feeling their emotions and breathing their atmosphere. Now, as the mist clears and the fires burn low, you step back into the familiar surroundings of your own world, forever changed by your experiences. The sagas have ended, but their echoes resonate within you. The spirit of the North whispers in the wind, urging you to hold fast to the values of resilience, courage, and camaraderie. As you navigate the paths of your own life, remember the lessons learned in the land of ice and honor. The strength found in the darkest winters will guide you, and the bonds forged in the face of adversity will sustain you. Carry the spirit of the North within your heart, for it is a beacon that will light your way through life's true lives as challenges and lead you to the warmth of triumph and fellowship. The inscription reads, "Here lies the chieftain's daughter, whose light shone brightly but was extinguished too soon." As the wind rustles through the nearby trees, you feel a sense of peace settle over you. The sting of grief has lessened, replaced by fond memories and the knowledge that the young chieftain's daughter is resting in a place of honor. Depending on the status of the deceased, grave goods such as weapons, clothing, food, drink, and precious metals might be placed within the ship. Animals might even be sacrificed and allowed to enter the grave alongside the body. When everything is in place, the body is carried out and placed in the center of the ship. The chieftain recites traditional prayers, invoking the gods to bless his daughter's journey. After one last lingering look, the ship is pushed into the grave and covered with the excavated soil. A final prayer is spoken, and the assembled villagers slowly disperse. Here, however, nothing is wasted. Linen cloths are used to dry the body, not as a shroud, but to cover the deceased once they've been laid out. He shows you where he'd like a cairn built and asks you to see that it is completed as quickly as possible so the workers can get back to their homes. As you direct the placement of each rock monolith, you think of the young queen who met her end so prematurely. You remember her infectious laugh, her wisdom beyond her years, and the fierce love she had for her family and people. The memory of her strength and grace inspires you to ensure her resting place is as magnificent as she was. Burial customs varied across Scandinavia, but generally followed three primary patterns. The cairn stands tall and proud, a fitting tribute to a remarkable woman. Around you, the workers begin to trickle back to their homes, eager to reunite with their families and share stories of the day's events. The chieftain approaches you, his face etched with gratitude. He thanks you for your help, acknowledging that without your guidance, the project would not have been completed so swiftly. The first was cremation, often performed in communal mounds, although some families might opt for a simple funeral pyre on their property. The second was interment, where the body was placed in a grave, sometimes accompanied by grave goods, as well as the occasional human sacrifice, which you hope won't happen today. The third method was preservation, usually through the use of peat or bog. This form of burial was associated with the earlier Iron Age, and while less common, still practiced in isolated areas. Symptoms include fever, night sweats, weight loss, and persistent coughing. The face was covered with a veil until it was time for burial. What are you to do? Well, first, you follow your village's traditions for dealing with the impending death. The dying woman's husband and children gather by her side, along with the chieftain and other members of the ruling family. While the adults speak in hushed tones, you stay by the children, comforting them and reminding them that their mother is not abandoned and she will not feel pain or cold. Together, you recall happy memories, telling stories of her laughter, kindness, and strength. You also discuss her wish to be buried with her favorite possessions, such as a silver necklace, a ceremonial axe, or a horse harness. Once the body starts to cool, the family gathers again and carefully cleanses the corpse. This duty falls to the closest family members, who wash and perfume the body with reverence. Hands were folded and jewelry placed upon them. The mouth was shut and bound, and the body was fastened within a coffin, which was then lowered into the grave. Some villages might choose to hold a ceremony before lowering the coffin, where prayers or poems might be offered to the gods, urging them to guide the deceased on their journey to the afterlife. Regardless of the chosen method of disposal, you knew it would be done with reverence and dignity, ensuring the deceased would not feel abandoned or alone. At the time, though, the only thing your village healer knows is that his patient is critically ill. Treatments might include bloodletting, where the patient's blood is drained in hopes of balancing their humors, or herbal remedies, depending on the healer's knowledge. Fear constricts your throat, for in your homeland, when someone passes, your village elder ensures every precaution is taken. If death goes unaddressed, it is believed the restless spirit could linger, causing illness or misfortune to befall family members. So everyone knows how to handle the passing of a loved one, or so you thought. For this tale tells of a new scenario, one where you must deal with the passing of someone unexpected, someone dear. Now, however, a hush has fallen over the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the murmured tones of a healer speaking softly to a woman lying still upon a bearskin rug. You step closer and catch fragments of their conversation. Mention of herbs, of sleep, of careful measures taken, and a long winter ahead. To begin, let's examine the medical situation at hand. Despite the somber mood, order prevails. You remember the preparations your village would make for any approaching death. First, finding out one's fate. Your community's seer would consult the runes or practice divination to determine if death was near. Once it was confirmed, the family would inform the community, who would offer support and assistance. Then came the gathering. Typically, family members would stay awake and keep watch over the dying person, sharing stories and holding feasts, which you join in too. There would be no hiding the inevitable, no shutting oneself away from reality. The Vikings believed in confronting death directly, accepting it as a natural part of life. The next day, you help carry out the washing of the body, a sacred duty reserved for close family members. With the decision on burial method made, you would prepare the body. But here, the situation is different. The healer shakes his head slowly and grimly, indicating there is no saving the woman, who is the daughter of the chieftain. Afterward, you assist in preparing the burial site. A large excavation is necessary for a ship burial, which the chieftain has requested. While grieving, the chieftain asks you to stay behind and tend to the grave. As the sun dips below the horizon, bathing the landscape in hues of orange and purple, you step back to admire your handiwork. As the days pass, the wound of her passing begins to heal somewhat, but the ache remains. The following spring, the chieftain and his wife return to the cairn. So there you were, caught between the reality of loss and the comforting traditions of your society. This brings us to the end of your journey into the world of the Norse. This is a history original. The year is 793 A.D., the island of Lindisfarne off the northeast coast of England. But the Vikings were smarter about it. See, the Saxons targeted churches because they had valuable treasures and because attacking a church was a low-risk way to acquire some easy plunder. Under the reign of Rus ruler Oleg of the Varangian, Vikings sailed east as far as Constantinople, where they made a critical discovery, a direct route to the Byzantine Empire. Now, thanks to Oleg's military prowess, the Vikings enjoyed safe passage to the Byzantines' doorstep. According to legend, Ragnar negotiated with a local prince to marry his daughter and take over the city. While Ubba and Halfdan conducted raids along the coast, Ever stayed in the center of their warband, controlling their supplies and making sure the troops were fed. It was an incredibly risky move. Relying on your enemy to keep you supplied is never a good idea. But it worked, and they succeeded in pillaging all across England. And that's not to say they didn't face opposition. In fact, they fought many battles with Ella's army, defeating them soundly and killing Ella himself. But the bigger problem wasn't Ella or his army. It was the English princes and bishops who hired mercenaries to stop the Viking onslaught. Suddenly, the brothers found themselves facing armies with professional soldiers and strategies. Unable to cope with the organized resistance, Ivor's warband eventually withdrew to their bases in Ireland. And there, just 7 years after their first foray into England, they died. But instead of settling down, he used Kiev as a base to launch attacks against neighboring Slavic tribes. Though historians now know that many of the legends surrounding the brothers are untrue, their deeds continue to inspire modern artists, and their names echo throughout Scandinavia. As Ragnar pillaged and his sons grew older, it seems that the brothers developed ambitions of their own. Eventually, according to legend, Ragnar fell in battle with King Ella of Northumbria. His sons returned home to find that their grandfather, Steph, had unleashed a wave of Viking attacks against the English coast. Wanting to honor their father's legacy and capitalize on the opportunity for plunder, the brothers rallied their forces and prepared to set out on their own. From there, they could sell their plunder in the imperial markets, giving them a financial incentive to forge even further into the heartland of Eurasia. After all, who would stop them? The Vikings took the same idea and ran with it. But we do know that he had a plan and that he knew exactly what he wanted. To get there, Ragnar put together a crew of trusted companions, including his 2 sons, Ubba and Halfdan Ragnarsson, as well as a powerful warband of elite fighters. Ragnar likely chose these men carefully, selecting individuals with experience navigating rivers, fighting in battle, and enduring harsh environments. He also probably emphasized the importance of discipline and teamwork, since the success of their mission depended on their ability to work together. Throughout Scandinavia, churches were getting robbed left and right, so they broadened their horizons, targeting monasteries on the coast of Ireland, France, the British Isles, and even northern Africa. And though the Vikings were willing to fight, their preference was to strike when no one was expecting it, hit fast, and escape before anyone could mount a defense. Of course, this meant that their success depended on speed, secrecy, and surprise. But luckily for them, they had plenty of all three. The action, a Viking raid. Now, exactly what went down on that fateful day is a matter of debate among historians. But one thing is for sure, this northern outpost of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria won't look the same ever again. And if you want to understand why, you've got to start with Scandinavia. The Vikings hailed from a bunch of different places, which is part of why they were such successful traders, raiders, and explorers. Over the course of the 8th through 11th centuries, they roamed a massive swath of land stretching from Russia to Ireland to the Mediterranean. But it was in Scandinavia where the vast majority of them lived. And though we usually think of Scandinavia today as icy and frozen, the area had a much more climate back then, leading to an abundance of food and warmer temperatures. What's more, the region was densely populated. It wasn't unusual for extended families to live together in close-knit groups known as the kindred. And because these communities were so tightly knit, they needed a way to organize themselves and keep order. Enter the thing, basically a Nordic word for a public assembly. Things varied in size depending on the kingdom, but every Scandinavian king owed his power to the consent of his people, who gathered in things to make laws, settle disputes, and choose their leaders. In other words, Viking society was surprisingly egalitarian for the time period. Now, this isn't to say that women had political rights or that everyone was treated equally. Kings did enjoy considerable power, and there were rigid social hierarchies. But compared to contemporaries in Europe, Scandinavian kings had it relatively tough. They couldn't just rule however they wanted. They had to consider the will of the people. If that sounds like a recipe for indecision, however, you'd be wrong. One of the big advantages of a system like this was that the leader had a direct connection to their people, meaning they could raise taxes or call for raids quickly and efficiently. This proved to be a winning combination. Kings became incredibly powerful, expanding their territories and growing their navies. In other words, their subjects didn't hate paying taxes, so long as the money was used wisely, especially on ships. The Vikings were masters of the sea. They carved longships from sturdy oak, fast enough to travel great distances and deep enough to navigate rivers far inland. This gave the Vikings unprecedented access to resources and allowed them to explore new lands. But as useful as these ships were for trading and exploring, they were even better for plundering. And this brings us back to Lindisfarne. Now, the specifics of what happened in 793 are unknown. We don't know how many Vikings attacked, what exactly they stole, or whether anyone was killed. All we have is a written account by a monk who fled the island, describing the horror of the attack and the devastation he found upon returning. But we do know that when the Vikings showed up, the inhabitants of Lindisfarne weren't prepared to defend themselves. Maybe they didn't realize the danger. After all, this was their first recorded attack in England. Or maybe they simply assumed that no one would dare attack God's holy church. Either way, the result was devastating. The church was ransacked, its treasures stolen, and its library destroyed. And though such attacks would become commonplace over the next century, this day marked the end of Lindisfarne as a religious center and the beginning of Viking Age England. Now, to be fair, the Vikings didn't invent raiding. That's something the Saxons had been doing for decades. For centuries, scholars believed that Viking expansion ended at the North Sea, but recent research suggests otherwise. Now, we don't know what prompted Ragnar Lothbrok to set out on his journey. The group's first stop was the river Volga, which led them all the way to the city of Kiev. Now, exactly when this happened is unclear, but the brothers' campaign in England was going strong by 865, but their strategy was simple. As for their legacy, well, that lives on. Thanks for watching.